Lord of Geo, Heaven Star. If you're into Genshin lore or just a Zhongli fan, you probably know that the recent Lunar 4 Lantern Rite caused a bit of a buzz with this new name drop. You probably have already heard all the theories about morning stars, solar chariots and sun gods, and that the Heaven Star name has been in the game since version 1.1 in Chinese. However, the focus of this video is not just on Heaven Star, but also the Lord of Geo itself, because guess what? This Lord of Geo in its original Chinese is actually different to all of the previous mentions of Lord of Geo in the game. Welcome to Genshin Impact Lost in Translation. I'm going to preface this by saying, yes, translation and localization is hard, especially for a language like Chinese, and especially for characters like Zhongli, who basically speak in all sorts of 4-character proverbs. As a multilingual person, seeing the different translations can be both annoying but also interesting, because you sometimes learn new implications. Usually, I would just keep these thoughts to myself, but some of the English translations really bugged me in the recent patch, so this video is a means of directing the energy to something more productive. Also, disclaimer, I may alternate between Mandarin Chinese pronunciations and English ones for names. As this script is in English, it is easy to slip into English tones, but since the subject matter is about translation, the original language will be mentioned too, so bear with me if I alternate between Zhongli and Zhongli, Liyue and Liyue, etc. I'm also just one person doing this out of my own time and effort, so excuse the bad editing and any errors. With that, let's get started. For the uninitiated, the Lunar 4 Lantern Rite revealed a new name for Zhongli, Lord of Geo, Heaven Star. At first glance, the Heaven Star bit appears to be the new lore-relevant title, but for those who play in Chinese or Japanese, it's a bit more interesting than what seems to appear on the surface. The whole title in Chinese is Yanzu Tianxing, or Ganshu Tensei in Japanese. This can be broken into two parts, Yanzu, which they have translated as Lord of Geo, and Tianxing, which is Heaven Star, or Heavenly Star. This Tianxing bit has been in the game since 1.1 when Zhongli was released, as you may have already heard. It is the name of his burst, which for some reason was localized as Planet Befall in English, and it is also in his name card, so for CN and JP players, this is nothing new, although it does have some interesting implications. More on that later. Let's look at the Yanzu bit. The title Lord of Geo has been used scattered across the game, usually as a translation of the various names Zhongli has been referred to with by various folks. However, Yanzu is new. Zibai then refers to him as Yanjun, or Gankun in Japanese, which takes the first character of Yin in essentially a respectful way of address. This is somewhat similar to how the Adepti refer to Zhongli as Dijun, which is taken from his title Yanwang Dijun, usually translated as Rex Lapis in English. Both Yanzu and Yanjun are Lord of Geo in the English version. You can see where I'm going with this. In English, all of the various rock-related titles that Zhongli, or more accurately Morax, has been referred to with, are all just translated to Lord of Geo when not using the main translation. There are obviously plenty of connotations lost in translation here. Let's focus on Yanzu, as that one is potentially more of a lore bomb. The Zu in Yanzu can mean owner or master. This suggests he is the owner of Geo, or perhaps originator. Does this mean he is the Dragon Sovereign? Or something transcending even that? We don't know at this point. What we do know, however, is that this implies he had some sort of authority over the Geo element even before the Archon War, where he was eventually granted the Geo Archon's authority. From a timeline perspective, if Morax already had the power over Geo before founding Liyue, then his main title, Yanwang Dijun, makes sense from a logical standpoint, inheriting the authority of the element and adding hierarchy. The Emperor, or Imperial Sovereign of Liyue, who also happens to hold the power of Geo. So, if this main title, Yanwang Dijun, is sometimes translated as Lord of Geo too, what is the point of having Rex Lapis, in Latin nonetheless? Yes, it sounds cooler, but all other names related to Liyue in the English version use some sort of phonetic transliteration of the Chinese, or a more literal translation of the character meanings. And if they wanted to use Rex Lapis as the title in the first place, why then sometimes use Lord of Geo again? Latin is the language more commonly associated with Khaenri'ah or the Abyss in-game. This feels like a somewhat deliberate choice of naming. Neuvillette refers to Morax as Deus Auri, another Latin name. Both these names highlight aspects of Morax that are considered fundamental to his identity, his authority over Geo, and his power of gold. You could go into theories of how this then leads to sun connotations and whatnot, but that is not the point of this video. We are focusing here solely on the language. He has names, not in the language his region is associated with, and those names arguably represent his true self more. So that was a lot of talk on rocks. Let's move on to the heavens. The Heaven Star part of the new title is Tianxing in Chinese. As mentioned earlier, this has already been in the game since version 1.1 when Zhongli was released. Tianxing literally is the characters for sky and star. The character for sky, with context, can represent the heavens or just celestial connotations. In the game, the Heavenly Principles also uses this character of sky, Tianli, so it makes sense that the English localization went with Heaven Star. Tianxing in general can also just refer to a star or celestial body, i.e. a thing in the sky. Anyway, this association with stars leads to a lot of theories that I'm sure many lore-orientated folks have already gone over. You can find plenty of videos explaining these, so I'm not going to spend too much time on that. Instead, let's look at another area where this Heaven Star name brings interesting implications language-wise. The Li Yue Qixing. Qixing translated literally means 7 stars. Each member of the Qixing has a title that corresponds to a star name. Some languages do actually keep this translation. For example, in French, the Qixing is literally Les Sept Étoiles, and the Tianquan is La Maigre, the Yuheng is La Lioth, etc. Why English chose to use the Chinese phonetic names instead of English or traditional star names? Well, probably because it sounds more in line with the other names in the region, being Chinese-based. However, that makes the Rex Lapis name even more of an outlier. Anyway, looking at the 7 stars, Tianquan, Maigres or Delta Ursae Majoris is 2 characters, sky heaven and authority power, which some translate as star of celestial balance. Taking it literally, you could also interpret it as having the authority of the heavens. Is this heaven Celestia, gods in general? Usually one would just think this is equivalent to how emperors of the past were representative of divine will. This is sort of the position that Ningguang's character is in, and reflects the Tianquan role in game as the one who maintains the laws from Morax. The star itself is actually the 4th star in the Northern Dipper asterism in Chinese, rather than the 1st, so the Tianquan appearing to be so openly powerful despite all Qixing members supposedly being equal in rank, suggests that the game is taking some of the literal character meanings. Now, with Zhongli's newly revealed title, you can start making some wild connections. Li Yue was founded roughly 3,700 years ago. This would have been before the conclusion of the Arkan War, and thus before Morax was granted the Geo-Arkan's authority. We also know that the Qixing was formed roughly 2,000 years ago, around the end of the Arkan War. The Heaven Star title predates all of this. Was the naming of the 7 stars then perhaps intentional? The basic surface implication is that, well, the heaven that the 7 stars are reporting to is just Rex Lapis, as the Heaven Star. Then, if you think deeper, what was the reason for choosing 7 stars as what is essentially his government? We all know that Genshin has quite a bit of emphasis on the number 7. 7 Archons, 7 Dragon Sovereigns, 7 Celestial Nails. Did whoever Zhongli was before intentionally try to replicate a hierarchy that he was previously part of, or perhaps even ruled? In traditional Chinese astronomy, the celestial sphere is divided into asterisms, or groups of stars, like constellations. The large region surrounding the North Celestial Pole is divided into 3 enclosures, or Sanyuan. The Northern Dipper asterism, which we commonly know as the Big Dip in English, is part of the Ziwei enclosure, literally meaning forbidden purple enclosure. It symbolizes the Emperor and Imperial Palace, essentially a representation of the Celestial Palace, mirroring the earthly Emperor. The many stars in this enclosure are grouped into asterisms that represent the imperial officials, royal members, and palace structure. And who has emperor connotations in their name again? Yep, it's Rex Lapis. In the story quest with Ezhdeha, Zhongli mentions that he was a god of mankind, an earthly emperor, so to speak. You could go out on a limb and consider, before Morax was demoted 6,000 years ago, was he some sort of celestial emperor, a god of Celestia? But maybe that's reaching for straws. We can also look at this from a constellation perspective in the actual game. There are quite a few theories around constellations in Genshin being related to fate. We know that Neuvillette's constellation is just something he made up to represent himself to please the Melusines. This implies that those with the power from the old world who are not bound by the rules of the heavenly principles have the power to make their own fate, thus changing their constellation to their will. Zhongli's constellation is Lapis Dei, mirroring the format of Venti's Carmen Dei, a naming convention that is widely accepted as being only for the original Archons. However, in Chinese, Zhongli's constellation name is Yanwang Dijun. Yes, Rex Lapis once again. Rex Lapis itself is already Latin. If they were trying to keep the Latin naming for the constellations across characters, in theory, there's no reason to not use just Rex Lapis. Initially, you would think, well, okay, but that's spoilers for the Archon quest. but it was marked with question marks, like they did with the Gnosis info anyway. If in Chinese and Japanese they're outright using this name, the choice to not use Rex Lapis in English was probably intentional. Going back to the constellation dictating your fate thread, this implies that A, either Zhongli's constellation is fake, or B, he is powerful enough to decide that his own fate is controlled by himself, and thus outside of the heavenly principles' control. It is a designation he made, representative of himself under the current world that is ruled by the heavenly principles. This can suggest that he is at least as powerful, or more, than Neuvillette, a literal dragon sovereign. Or option C, or more pessimistic spin on this, would be to consider the exact opposite. That his constellation is Yanwan Dijun because that is the fate he is bound by, the role casted by the heavenly principles, the role of Rex Lapis, which is who he was in the period after the War of the Funerary Flame. Looking at other powerful beings related to old world power, such as Columbina, we can see that she also has herself as a constellation. Oddly enough, she actually has the opposite problem compared to Zhongli. Her constellation in English is herself, but in Chinese it is actually Yu Ye Ge Zuo. This is unique to Chinese and is not shared with the Japanese version as most other names are. On the topic of constellations, there's one last thing I would like to touch upon. This one thing that has always tickled the back of my mind when I think about Zhongli theories and Lost in Translation. His fifth constellation. I'm actually going to start with the Japanese here first, because I think it's the most straightforward one that makes you do a double take. His fifth constellation in Japanese is Heki, Tenni o Mamoru, which can mean a wall protecting or following the rules of heaven. But the Tenni used here is literally also the same characters used for the heavenly principles. So taking into account game context, this is literally protect the heavenly principles. Yep, this bombshell has been there since 1.1. The Heki bit, which is wall in Japanese, uses the same character as the Chinese Bi in Cang Bi, which is a type of jade artifact. Given the naming format for Zhongli's constellations, it can also be inferred that the Japanese is referring to this beat too, rather than a literal wall, but this does not change the meaning of protecting the heavenly principles. The Chinese constellation is Cang Bi Qu Zi Chang Zao Tian Li. Remember I mentioned 4 character proverbs at the beginning of this video? This is another example of how annoying some Chinese text can be to interpret. Let's break this down. The Tianli bit is the same heavenly principles. The 4 characters before this individually mean the following. Put together literally, it gives you something along the lines of drive it or them away, long shine bright heavenly principles, which you could interpret as expel them so that the heavenly principles may endure and shine clearly. Them, in this case, would be those who pose a threat to the heavenly principles' rules. So in essence, this is a command of protection, which makes the Japanese rendition make more sense in terms of translation. Without game context, you could treat the Tianli part as representing just moral or natural order, which would give way to the interpretation of drive it away so that the moral order manifests and stands. The it, in this case, would be anything negative or contrary to this natural order. This interpretation is closer to the English localization of herald of the order. Anyhow, what does all of this suggest? At this point, again, we don't know. Could it be a reference to that contract Morax has with the heavenly principles? Is it an implication that he is bound under them in some way, that he must protect them from any opposition? Does this mean that when the game reaches a point when the traveller will challenge the heavenly principles, Zhongli will become our enemy? Is this perhaps part of the reason why he was willing to trade his gnosis with the Tsaritsa, so that he can be free from their rule and return to his true self before he was cast the role of Rex Lapis? As the game progresses, we learn more and more about the hidden secrets and history of Teyvat. Zhongli gains more titles and we are left only more confused. It makes you wonder, who or what exactly is he? Is Morax even his true name? From Durin's story quest, we know the importance of names to a person's existence. From the naming of Wanderer and the Little One, we know that Morax is not accepted as an option, despite the other Archons' names being available. Does this imply the name Morax does hold significance beyond the current rules of Teyvat? The more titles and names one has, the more they are tied to history. Zhongli mentions in the Lantern Rite quest about not wanting to expose the traveller to too many of Teyvat's secrets, as this will make it harder for them to leave. Is he perhaps speaking from personal experience? We are still no closer to figuring out the truth, but the little crumbs left lost in translation fuel interesting links and theories. I hope that this video has given you some food for thought and made you think about languages, or perhaps inspired you to study a bit yourself. There's so much more that can be gone into, but that would make this video even longer than it is. If you have learned something new today, please drop a like, and if there's some other translation content that you would like me to look at, leave a comment down below. Wishing you a good day wherever you are, and good luck on your pulls.